Okay, on Duff page 79, we have paper, writing, parchment, how to write, what types of things to write. We're going to talk about all things paper. Let's start at the beginning. Paper writing was first on clay tablets. They took pieces of clay, they would put a water base on them, make them as flat as they could, take a long pen. It was a stylus made out of reeds, bulrushes essentially, which was very hard, kind of metal piece, a nib at the end so they could etch in writing. They separated each letter from each other because that was easier with the instrument in which they were using. They would then let them dry in the sun, and then they would store them on shelves, kind of like modern books today. The problem is nobody knew what the book titles were because there's no spine. Lack of a spine on all of these modalities is highly problematic and very, very difficult to find. So they would have different ways in which to find things. The next part of our story is papyrus. We're not up to what they were talking about in the Gemara in page 79, because there they were talking about hides. So the next piece is papyrus, and papyrus is very ancient, almost 4,000 years old. They found some papyrus pieces for 3,000 years old, and they took papyrus is from the long reeds, bulrushes that are found along the Nile, in the Nile Valley. There's bulrushes everywhere, but the ones in Egypt were the most famous and the most, I guess, thick and fibrous. They would take a long piece and they would weave it together and they would make a text, hence the word textile, and text have an etymological base because that's how you make a piece of paper, is you take two pieces and you weave them together, bind them tight, flatten them out, take some kind of thick ink, and that's how you write on paper, which granted was not the easiest way. We should be so grateful for our paper, ballpoint pen, and everything else that we do with writing. The papyrus pieces of paper were the best at this point and were the most sought after. Egypt didn't like people using its papyrus, and eventually the whole thing became extinct anyways because there wasn't enough. So other people had to develop other pieces of paper. Now, just to get back to papyrus, the Bar Kokhba caves, 2nd century, have some paper remnants of people writing things, and they used papyrus because that was the paper, I guess, that was, easy to get, or maybe more accessible at the time. And the paper was written, there was letters, and there was contracts, and there was, of course, there was IOUs, and there was descriptions, and there was warnings, and there was different things like that, and they used it all on papyrus, and it survived today because papyrus does well in a dry, non-humid based environment, which of course the Dead Sea area was. The second part of our story, or the last part of our story, are the hides, and that's what we found the discussion in the Gemara. The hides are called, here's the word in the middle of there, right? The word is, duchsostos, and duchsostos comes from the Greek word, same word, and it really means dermis, or the skin. Epidermis also is the skin of the animal, and the animal has a lot of layers of skin, as we hear about in the Gemara. And what they would do, of course, is use the skin from either calves, from sheep, or from goats, and they would use these skins, clean them, tan them, stretch them out so they'd be thin. And the great thing about these kind of hides is that you could write on both sides. You could do two-sided, which was cheaper, better, more economical. You could also reuse them. You could erase, which is something very interesting. You could kind of white it out and then rework it. And many times we have found ancient literature from the 2nd century, 1st century, 3rd century, from hides that were reused. And today the technology is such that we can lift off whatever was used last and find out by various mechanisms what was written on early. And lots of things were found that were highly, highly unusual. Now, the great thing about this hide is you could also write on it, you could roll it, and then you could store it easier. It was just a better kind of mechanism for all of these purposes. And of course, today our Torah scrolls we see, those are rolled. Now, the hard thing about a rolled, right, scroll, as distinct from a book, is that it's hard to go to page 72. It's hard to go to page 52. It's hard to go to page 102. You have to open it up, find it, look where it is. We know that the two sides become uneven. We see the difficulties and the challenges of actually using a Torah scroll. The Jews, actually, are one of the only people that are still using hides as paper. So, skins are really, really, really interesting, and there's good quality, bad quality, and they talked all about it, but the parchment which we use today in Torah scrolls is certainly going back hundreds and hundreds of years. It was just sort of got out of fashion recently. Of course, the Chinese invented a different kind of mechanism, and that's the history of paper.